Thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome. My name is Z Jeremic. I'm today's host and CEO of Mass Engines. We are a marketing and sales consultancy helping companies build their revenue engines. I'm really looking forward to moderating this conversation, which is going to really focus on revenue operations and how to use it as a tool for sales and marketing alignment, and it's coming one step closer to building your revenue engine. So this is part 2 of our 3-part fall series. We're running about 1 live conversation per month. For those of you who haven't joined us before, series is meant to be a live interactive discussion. So we want you to engage over chat, jump on the mic if you're comfortable. Really, it's all about, we really are trying to move away from the static one-way conversation into more of a engaging discussion. So I'm sure revenue ops might be something that you're interested in, something that you've maybe already are starting down the path on. So you probably have perspectives. Chime in, join in, and let us know what you're thinking. So with that in mind, what does the next 45 minutes look like? So we'll start by answering a few questions that came in prior to the forum, and then we'll turn it over to you. If you have any questions to discuss, again, please use the chat box. Raise up the questions. Leah, who's our chat box moderator, will work with you to bring the questions into the forum. Now on to our guest speakers. In the marketing corner, we have Rosalyn Santa Elena, the Chief Revenue Operations Officer and founder of the RevOps Collective. So Rosalyn has over 25 years experience in technology, deep expertise in revenue operations on both the marketing and sales ops side. And she has a mission to make RevOps a strategic differentiator in every organization. On the other side, bring the sales perspective, I think the also valuable sales perspective, we have Kyle Salem, the inside sales manager of Brandwatch. Kyle is a seasoned sales leader with extensive cross-industry experience. He combines strong metrics knowledge, insight with motivational skills to help organizations maximize performance and results. So welcome both Rosalyn and Kyle.
Great to be here.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here too.
Excellent. So I know we're all looking forward to getting the conversation going. So just a few housekeeping items. So we ask, please, just in terms of to minimize the background noise, stay muted. If you have a comment or question, type into the chat, and we'll get you included into the conversation. And all resources and recording of this conversation will be sent up as a follow-up to everyone. You'll get it in your email, so you don't have to furiously take notes or screenshots. Everything, we'll make everything available to you right afterwards. Awesome. So let's just jump into it. So this forum is all going to be all about revenue operations. We know organizations are placing an increasing focus on revenue operations. There's more and more conversations on this topic, but there's really kind of a gap between theory and practice. So we want to use this forum today to start digging into it. But before we do that, let's hear from you. So in a second here, you'll see a question pop up on your screen. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident would you be explaining the concept of revenue operations to someone? So let's give folks about 20 to 30 seconds to respond, share their perspective. And I think that'll be a good kind of a kickoff to this conversation, as we'll all get a chance to see where everyone's coming from. All right, I guess this is pretty good. I think we're in for a good conversation. I can see most folks here are in the upper part of the scale here. So most folks feel either very comfortable or fairly comfortable explaining the concept of revenue operations. This is great. I feel like this is really going to let us power up the conversation faster and get into the nitty-gritty rather than kind of circle around the edges. So, all right. So Rosalyn, I'd love to start with you. I mean, I feel like, revenue ops is kind of like, you live and breathe revenue ops. Share your perspective with us. What is revenue operations, and do you believe it's necessary? I mean, I feel like it's almost a superfluous question, but please share your perspective.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. So, I mean, I think, I think about revenue operations, the way I explain it to folks when they ask me is really RevOps is the infrastructure to really help accelerate and optimize revenue growth, right? And revenue retention. If you think about the infrastructure, meaning people, process, technology, data, insights, and enablement, it's really all of those things to support the end-to-end revenue process. And that's from top of funnel marketing through being a prospect, through a customer, and then a repeat customer through expansion and retention. So really that entire customer journey, if you will. And definitely, it is definitely necessary, and more so, I think, for organizations today than at any time before, which is, I think, why there's been so much interest in the last couple of years and sort of this rise of RevOps, because we're all being asked to do more, right, with less. Especially the last few years, the market has been crazy, right? The ups and downs have just been like a roller coaster. So I think it's even more critical now to have that strong infrastructure to support the business, but also to have those insights, right, and the data real time and available to the business to help us, make decisions and drive action.
Awesome. Kyle, I'd love to hear from you. Like if we're looking at the other side of the table, sales.
Yeah.
Like, when we talk about operations, right? Not exciting. It's not necessarily like, operations is not going to be closing revenue. Sales is closing revenue. How do you see relevance of revenue operations to sales?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's sales that's accountable for revenue that's coming into the organization. Customer success, account management for retaining those customers. Revenue operations is a concept that's been around for a long time now, not necessarily with that particular terminology, but how do we go after the right audience? How do we make sure that we're on the cutting edge and delivering for our audience, not just what they want today, but what they want tomorrow? That's already done within sales and within customer service. If it's not happening now within your current organization, certainly a revenue ops mindset can really come forward to help you in that particular regard. But in many cases, in many organizations, that's happening currently. I'm always curious within an organization to learn, what are they doing right now? What tools and technology are they using to leverage and to understand their current client base, where the market is going tomorrow? And if there's a gap there, someone from a RevOps team can certainly help in that particular regard. But often that's happening already. And sometimes we have to be careful in that a new department, a RevOps department, can distract from what's going on within sales, for example. So right now, I manage an inside sales team here at Brandwatch right now. If our team works 40 hours a week, on the clock, 40 hours a week, realistically, they're probably working 30 because you're going to go for lunch, you're going to network with other people. You're probably getting 30 hours of productivity a week. It's 120 a month. That's 360 in a quarter. And I'm going to stop right there because salespeople are measured typically on a quarterly basis. Okay. So if revenue operations can help me and my team, and yes, I'm going to be selfish in the way that I talk just a little bit right now, it's going to help me and my team use our team's 360 hours a quarter to be more productive with who we're going to go after and why, and generate more revenue. I love it. And I can't wait to work with them. If they're going to distract us and they're going to take away time and energy, that's going to be a different conversation.
See, I love that. I love that perspective. And I feel like this is really where I feel like the rubber hits the road, is that while the concept sounds good and seems exciting, most of us have seen kind of the promise of sales ops or marketing ops and how it's going to help, but oftentimes it ends up being relegated to list uploads and tech problems, not necessarily driving value for a specific group. Like you said, for your group, are you going to help my team be more productive and close more deals?
Exactly. And if they're going to help us with technology and making sure there are gaps that are closed from that particular perspective, that's great. That's value. Let's not misconstrue that as RevOps. That's ops.
Yes. So Rosalyn, I'd love to kind of go back to you here, because I feel like this is, I feel like Kyle, I love the sales perspective he brought in. I mean, and I feel like a lot of times, Rosalyn, I'm playing, the role that you usually play, but even here, I'd love to kind of to balance this conversation. I'll bring in maybe a voice from the marketing side, who basically going to have a very similar perspective to Kyle's, from obviously a different side. But in terms of, how is this going to help me run a better campaign, right? Like,
Yeah.
and am I, are we just going to get involved in a lot of conversations, but ultimately my campaigns are not necessarily going to improve as a result? Like, what do you say to that? How, like, as you kind of socialize these conversations and look to get buy-in within an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's funny that you kind of jump to the campaigns, because I always think about, when people on the marketing side, when we think about operations, we're thinking marketing automation, we're thinking campaigns, events, list uploads, right? Those tactical items that that you've brought up, where, I think Kyle brought up a great point on the sales side, which I think is maybe slower to be adopted on the marketing side. Around really looking at revenue operations as not just that tactical, tech person to run certain tactics, but that strategic partner, right? That person that is going to, or that function that's going to help make everything more efficient, and not only make it more efficient and run faster, but also to be able to do the analytics on what's working and what's not, right? And really digging deep. We can talk about managing campaigns, but what campaigns are working, right? Where are we spending our dollars, and where are we getting that ROI and that value? That's where operations, I think, can really help unleash sort of that power for marketing. And it's being that thought partner and that strategic partner to figure out what campaigns we should be doing and when, and then keeping those strategic objectives aligned with the rest of the organization, right? And I'm sure we're going to dive into marketing and sales alignment here during this conversation. So for sure, that's one step towards that direction as well.
Awesome. No, that's helpful. And I feel like as we're kind of getting going here, I feel like this is really the big question that I often run into, and I hear so often from companies, especially when you start talking to stakeholders, right, on marketing and sales side, because oftentimes it goes back exactly what Kyle said, like, are you going to help me? So, and are you going to help, like, even are you going to help, is this going to help marketing run better campaigns so I can get better qualified leads? Because again, one of the big issues we keep seeing even today is that oftentimes campaigns are running, and anyone, who seems to engage or respond becomes a lead. And now it's Kyle's team that's calling those leads, and they say, listen, they showed up at the booth, or they might have downloaded your white paper. They're not ready to have a conversation. And my team is wasting, 50% of their time calling these leads that are really not leads. They're at best prospects. I mean, Kyle, like, how much of this do you see with your team, where again, the leads that are coming from marketing, right? Usually everyone's like, sales will always say we need more leads, but then the reality is often, like, most of these leads are just not qualified properly. I mean, do you see that, Kyle? Like, I mean, how much of that is a reality on the sales side?
So I'll caveat, you will never find a sales leader in the world that's satisfied with the number of leads that they're getting. Everyone always wants more. So let's call that spade out there as it is. To flip the conversation, it's not really actually about leads. It's about demand. It's not lead generation. I don't need a stack of business cards, to use old vernacular of people that attended a conference. I need people that are truly engaged and themselves already in the buying cycle for me to engage with and tip the scales towards our particular business. That's what I'm after, is really that demand generation. And a great RevOps person, or operations, some people are doing this already without the RevOps department specifically already there, are able to identify prospects in the market that are truly engaged in the decision-making cycle right now. And they do it in a couple of different ways. They can give us a great understanding of which segments within the market tend to buy at certain times of year, who are the titles, who are the people, when do they evaluate, et cetera, for us to go after straight. We can also find out a lot of information as to who's downloading information from our websites, engaging online. And if you're using the right smart tools, you can truly find out who within your market is actively in the buying cycle for us to get involved with in conversations, and again, tip them towards our particular business to help them out.
I love that. I feel like it's funny, like in the last conversation last month, we actually tackled this very question of what is the difference between lead generation and demand generation. I feel like you kind of touched on a little bit here, this concept that demand generation is more focused on not just surfacing business cards, even if they're engaged, but really looking at engaging the decision makers and surfacing them when they're ready.
Right.
Rosalyn, I mean, when we're looking at RevOps, how do you see RevOps really enabling demand gen to be more effective? Because I feel like that's a little bit of the promise, right? Is that will help, RevOps can help. And I feel like you even hinted at that when you said it's about the analytics and the insights around where to invest to really be able to maximize those highly engaged folks that, again, Kyle's team wants to talk to.
Yeah. And I think Kyle actually touched on a lot of the points that, really are sort of those value drivers for RevOps, right? It is getting it's not just about getting the right data, but it's getting, when you think about the buyer, it's getting that information around who is the best buyer, right? Who is your ICP? Who are your target personas? What is that messaging? And really partnering with the marketing team to, dive deep into the data to understand and refine and continuously improve, right, your messaging and who are those target personas, and then getting those people to to the right, having the right campaigns for those people at the right time, and then continuing to evaluate that, and then getting those to be building up that demand for sales, right? When is the right time for sales to engage? Again, not passing a bunch of, people over, but the right people at the right time. Right. And that's managing, that's kind of RevOps around managing not just the data and insights, but the technology. And as Kyle mentioned, smart tools, right? There's great technology to be able to give you a lot of these intent signals and a lot of that information, but you need somebody who's constantly looking at that information, looking at it holistically, and then providing and bubbling up that information to your stakeholders at the right time.
And
Cool.
I think it's even further important that the RevOps team truly are aligned with the revenue side of the business, and our timelines are in sync. So if we're measured on a quarterly basis, I'd love it when our RevOps teams are measured on that same quarterly basis too, and together have the opportunities to pivot and grow on that fast track. To that end, critically important that RevOps rolls up into your CRO. It is not an operations purpose. It cannot be operations driven. It must be with a revenue mindset and therefore aligned with the CRO. Further, really love it when RevOps has the same skin in the game as the sales folks. So salespeople typically are at 60, 40, 70, 30 as far as their base versus variable income is concerned. Love it when RevOps has the same skin in the game and we're all digging in on trying to close that quarterly revenue gap, find that great revenue, increase that retention in much the same ways, and are rewarded accordingly when they're truly our partners in that journey.
See, I love this, and I feel like we're gonna. I really want to get the audience engaged as well. We're gonna do another poll here in about 2 minutes. But I feel like this whole idea of compensation, right? Like, or making like essentially setting up RevOps so that part of their compensation is based on the results that they drive. I would love to hear from the audience. Again, tap into chat if this is something that you want us to dive a little bit deeper into. In the meantime, I kind of want to touch on, before we go to the poll, this really critical question about buy-in, because I feel like, and let's just call it what it is, executive and stakeholder buy-in, because the assumption here is that the buy-in exists, right? The assumption is that marketing is actually looking, or the marketing stakeholders are looking for how do I do, how do I better define my ideal customer profile? But again, what I've see time and time again, that buy-in is not there. They're going to be looking, hey, I know what I'm doing. I don't, like, sure, if you can give me something, I'll take it into consideration. But I'm not necessarily going to be spending a lot of time. Let's sit down and RevOps can kind of tell me what I should be doing, whether in-source or outsource, right? So whether it's a team that's built internally or externally, I feel like there is a little bit of that tension. It's like, hey, don't tell me how to do my job, right? I'd love to, but I feel like the only way to overcome that objection is to get the buy-in internally. So I'd love to hear from both of you before we go to the poll around how do you get that buy-in? Like, how high up do you need to go? Is it the buy-in that needs to come at the very top, like the CMO, SVP of sales, maybe even above, and then it gets pushed down? Or is it much more about getting buy-in from individual stakeholders, more of that marketing manager, director level, or like, again, director of sales, to get the buy-in at that middle layer. What has your experience been like? At which point do you need to get buy-in so you don't end up dealing with pushback, right? And kind of like questioning, even like, well, we can't help you unless you're going to be playing ball here. Rosalyn, what's your perspective?
Yeah, you can see me continuously nodding my head and trying not to do it too furiously. But yeah, that has been my experience for sure. And I think about even at my last few companies, I mean, I joined a company where they didn't have revenue operations. The concept didn't exist, right? They had some folks supporting operations on the marketing side, primarily campaigns, right? Not strategic, not sort of that real deep insights and analytics, but just campaigns. So marketing automation. And then they had a sales ops team that was primarily CRM administrators and unfortunately more of an order taker type of role, and then a customer success and services operations team. And so my role was really to bring that together, right? And so there was buy-in. I reported into the president, and there was definitely buy-in at the executive level, at that highest level, CEO and president. But having to convince and sort of sell the idea to the CMO and to what we call the CRO, but he had just sales and post-sales. He didn't have the marketing side. So those were two separate organizations. And then also separate customer success and services organization. So when you talk about buy-in, literally going on like a roadshow the first 30 days, right? When I joined was, what is RevOps? It's like a selling cycle, right? It's what is it? Why do you need it? And why now, right? So I went through this 30 days of going through and explaining and educating and teaching, and then helping folks understand the value, right? And that's, coupled with listening. It's a lot of to understand kind of what's working and what's not, and then injecting, okay, well, here's how RevOps is going to help with those things that aren't working. And when you talk about buy-in at the top, but it is also buy-in at the every level, right? There was a lot of meetings with directors, managers, everybody, even the ops team themselves. There was a lot of convincing, right? Because they weren't really bought into it either. They hadn't worked in that model. So it's buy-in across the teams, but also at all the different levels. Of course, those conversations are a little bit different. But to your point, it is definitely a challenge for a lot of organizations because people haven't worked in this type of framework, right? So they haven't seen the value. Like Kyle has seen the value. So he's like, I know, and I want this. But it is about demonstrating value and about what's in it for them, right?
Yeah.
And then starting to demonstrate some of those wins, looking at some of that low-hanging fruit, get a couple wins under your belt, champion it, talk about it, make sure everybody knows the type of wins that you're getting. And then you slowly start to, build up that rapport and sort of that credibility over time.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I've seen the challenges, and I've seen the where things don't work out. Or sometimes it works out great, sometimes it doesn't, for sure. Z, your question, and really, Rosalyn, your answer is really kind of about people. It's about building relationships and building trust and bonds. And I got that inherent belief that everybody in the organization really wants to do well. They want to do well at their jobs. They want to do right by their colleagues. They want to bring the business forward. And if and when you run into the occasional person that doesn't, they're usually gone within a little while anyhow. So understanding and having that really important internal belief that everybody genuinely wants to help, that's where that open communication comes into play. If I, as a sales leader, don't work with my marketing people and share with them ideas I have, what I'm seeing in the market, where I think they can help me, and marketing's not sharing with me what they're seeing, where they think they can add value, RevOps as well, then we're not going to help each other to be successful as an organization. So I love your thinking, Rosalyn, about got to get that buy-in from the C-suite at the top to make sure that there's energy and support for those within the organization to invest their time to build out that organization and deliver the right demand in the market. So sales is pointed in the right direction. So they're closing more deals. So we're retaining at a very high rate, an increased measurable rate. All of this, of course, needs to be measured. Otherwise, it's not managed, of course. So yeah, I think you get that buy-in, and you just got to let people genuinely help each other.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'll just add that the key to getting buy-in is to ask the what's in it for me question on behalf of the audience that you're talking to. You have to understand what's in it for them, and you have to address that head on that's the only way to make this work, is that otherwise it's just another concept, another framework, another methodology that if it doesn't connect to what they're doing, it's going to be much tougher to get that buy-in.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. So let's go to another poll. Let's kind of gauge where everyone is and how they're feeling about this concept. So looking at your organization, who do you think should drive the RevOps concept in your organization? Do you think it's more, it should be coming more from sales, marketing, IT, new department? Maybe like, should it be a new, like a RevOps department? Or was it more like an operational? Again, we have an other option as well. If you want to, if that fits better. But yeah, we'd love to kind of again get your sense of where would this organization, who should be responsible for driving this concept within the organization, socializing it. So let's give everybody 10, 20 seconds, and then we'll look at the feedback. All right, so very interesting. Okay, so we got 0 for IT, which again, not surprising. In most organizations, that is a very different team. But yeah, we're seeing strong support for sales that it really should be coming from sales. Love that. There's some support for marketing, and I feel like there's also a very strong sense that it should be a new department that can then, I'm going to interpret the idea. Certainly my vote went for the new department as well, because now you can actually look to drive both sales and marketing towards as almost an external party working with them to get the buy-in and to look at really the bottom line. But I see the sales element is strong here for a number of folks, and I love it because it does connect. Ultimately, sales is responsible for revenue. Would be interesting to hear maybe the perspectives, Kyle, like, seeing kind of a strong feedback coming in that sales should own this should own the idea of RevOps. This should be driven by sales. Who do you like, knowing kind of sales organizations, Kyle? Where would this, if it was in sales, in the sales department, who do you think in sales should be responsible for? Where do you think it should sit within sales?
I think your head of RevOps, call them the vice president of revenue operations, would report into your chief revenue officer. It's got to be really senior and need to have a seat at the table as far as bringing operations into revenues. But the purpose of the department can never be lost, and the purpose is to generate greater top line revenue for the organization and to again increase retention of clients as well. So anything that has to do with dollars coming into the organization, which this is the purpose of this department, ought to report directly into the CRO.
Love it. Rosalyn, what's your perspective? I mean, I hear what Kyle is saying, right? If it's going to be in sales, it has to be someone senior, right? It's almost like, Kyle, I'm almost hearing kind of like, it's almost like the right hand person. I almost feel like that kind of resonates with a little what Rosalyn was saying earlier, is that it's about being able to drive those insights, and you have to be at a certain level in the organization. Like Rosalyn, you shared, you were basically, there was buy-in at the top level of the organization. What's your perspective? If it wasn't sales, like, do you agree with Kyle, or what have you seen work?
Yeah. So first of all, I love that Kyle's actually done my part of my pitch around how we have to have a seat at the table and how it has to be a high level role. But I do think that, whoever owns revenue in your organization, I think that is the right person for the head of RevOps to report into and sit with. And as you said, Z, this is the right hand. I view this role as the right hand person, the chief of staff, sort of the person, that thought leader and business partner, it's really strategic advisor to the CRO. And when I say CRO, I don't think of just a head of sales, right? I look at a chief revenue officer, someone who manages really that end-to-end revenue. It's from top of funnel to prospect to retention, right? And expansion. And so I know as just like RevOps is kind of evolving over the last few years, the role of the chief revenue officer is evolving as well, right? In a lot of organizations, the CRO is still the head of sales and maybe post-sales, right? And a lot of times they sit side by side with the CMO.
Right.
But there are organizations. Oh, go ahead, Kyle.
I was going to suggest that might be a point where we might differ, actually, Rosalyn. I think your head of marketing ought to also roll into the CRO.
Yeah, so exactly. Perfect. Okay,
Okay.
so we are definitely aligned in terms of that. I do think the CRO is the person who owns all of revenue. And it's not, as I always say, revenue is not just a sales responsibility, right? I always talk about how it's a team sport. Everybody is involved and they play a role, right? We all know that market, especially on the marketing side, we know that revenue started way before the first conversation, the first form was filled, right? And so I think that, marketing, sales, customer success, services, support, account management, if you have a renewals team, right, finance, product, everybody takes an active role in playing, part of that revenue journey and helping with revenue. And so ops is really that kind of overseer, right? The person who sort of takes that step back, has that holistic view across the funnel so that marketing can go focus on what they do really well, right? And sales can go focus on what they do really well and have somebody who's kind of overseeing and helping to push the pieces forward.
I love it. So, but look here, now let's ask the $1 million question here, because we're talking about the ideal scenario. And I certainly would agree with everything you guys are saying, but let's talk about the reality. And what I've heard and seen play out time and time again, organizations move in this direction, set up a CRO role. Now marketing reports to CRO. Guess who's the CRO? It's usually the head of sales. And so what the concern usually that comes on the marketing side is there is very little appreciation for the discipline of marketing and what it takes to actually do good marketing. And really very quickly, marketing gets reduced to running essentially lead generation, right? Because, hey, we got to meet our quota. We got to get the leads to meet our quota. How do you avoid this? This has happened so many times. It's just the natural, right? I feel like realistic evolution. And I feel like maybe it's just a step that organizations need to go through. But how do you deal with that? I feel like almost a bit of a schism where all of a sudden now marketing takes, instead of it being we're working together, it becomes more like it's all about sales, and marketing now just becomes placed under sales in terms of priorities, and in terms of especially that long-term planning and long-term demand generation, which is really where marketing really shines and really needs to invest resources into.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear Kyle's perspective, but I wholeheartedly agree, Z. And I think that also, even on the ops side, on the revenue operations side, we're seeing a lot of sales ops turn into, sort of be rebranded as revenue operations, where marketing ops folks don't want to sit in a revenue operations organization either, because that leader is focused on sales, right? And so I think, just as it's true for the head of RevOps, it's also true for the CRO, is you really need somebody in that role who truly has deep expertise across the funnel, right? They have to understand marketing, they have to understand sales, and more importantly, and just as importantly, especially in the SaaS model, they need to understand customer, right? Success and retention. A lot of times we talk about sales and marketing, we forget about, hey, what about when we've actually become a customer and now we have to drive retention and expansion. And so there's a lot there as well that I think that we don't focus in on as much. Also, if we just take our head of sales, somebody who's a hunter, somebody who's used to just acquiring net new logos and all of their focus is there, but not understanding the value across the funnel. And I think to your point, Z, I think it is a sort of a step. I think it's an evolution, right? It's a step going in that direction and we're still getting there, right? It's a journey. The same thing on the RevOps side, right? We're still seeing a lot of revenue operations leaders who are sales ops leaders and have never touched they've never touched a marketing campaign. They don't understand lead generation or demand gen or brand or content or, even how to run an event, right? So we're all learning. I think those ops leaders are also learning what's happening upstream and top of funnel and understanding what's happening post close.
Now, I love it. I love the perspective. It's an evolution. Kyle, I'll go right to you for the perspective, because I think it's such an important concept, because the reality is that we're trying to, I think overall, the direction here is one away from silos and into integration. However, the reality is that everyone is coming from a silo.
That's
so
right.
you kind of need, right? You need to go through this step of evolution step where there's going to be discomfort, and you almost kind of need to lean into that discomfort. Kyle, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, and thank you. It depends on the organization. Certainly in a SaaS model, as we're talking about right now, a mid-sized organization, for example, SaaS companies evolve so fast that that really long-term view of marketing often can get too long and too far into the future that it's just not reasonable to rely upon, because your company is going to change and evolve so much over the next couple of years. If you want to separate brand management and brand awareness away from marketing and have that as a separate topic that does not report into the chief revenue officer, all well and good. Every other marketing ought to be pointed towards bringing in money or other awareness into the organization. Could be bringing in new employees and other efforts as well. But the purpose of all of that really is to increase the top line revenue for the organization and the value for a company overall. So I do believe they all should be reporting into a CRO, head of sales, however you want to phrase it. I mean, usually that head of sales isn't just such a tactical individual that thinks just in such short term. Typically, when they're at that executive level, they've got a mid to longer term point of view as well. And again, if you want to separate brand awareness, that's totally fine. But I do think every other piece of marketing ought to report into sales.
Cool. Makes sense. Makes sense. I think we'll look to transition here and share a little bit. I'll throw out a takeaway that we've put together to kind of really put some of these concepts to test and to really kind of look at what does this journey look like. So if we are talking about it's a bit of an evolution, how do you actually work to get there? What might be some of the steps? So this is based on some of our experience and a lot of our work. We've identified there are certainly steps to get to revenue operations from where you are today. And in our view, it really kind of needs to start with attribution. I feel like that's been kind of mentioned a number of times, especially when we're looking for the marketing side. We have to be able to understand how the investments that are being made on the marketing side are connecting to the revenue on the other side. And then we kind of look at, and again, lead scoring, misunderstood concept. I think lead scoring is, for me, is much more a tool around sales and marketing alignment. Then we look at buyer journey mapping. Now, how do we actually align activities against how buyers actually discover solutions and vet them, to now move more and kind of into this idea of lead management, where we're actually using insights around how buyers buy and around from attribution as well to actually look to increase conversions to the funnel. And now once that practice is running, we're essentially at the revenue operations piece. I'd love to give you guys kind of your perspectives. What is missing here, right? Or does this even make sense in terms of how you guys have thought about revenue operations or the road to get there? So maybe
I can start.
Sure.
I think that this is a great view into the first couple of steps of revenue operations, right? This is a top of funnel view, which I think is really important. Attribution, obviously lead scoring, mapping the journey, lead management, and that's sort of the very top of the funnel leading into the rest of revenue operations. I view RevOps as then having, another slide, and one more slide to kind of follow the entire customer journey. This is sort of the handoff between, marketing and sales typically, right? I think that's where it ends. And I think, Kyle, your team would kind of pick that up from, the rest of from number 5 on, right? And then we start looking at once we engage the prospect, once we start having those conversations and we get into an active sales cycle. And then there's a whole nother cycle around once they've actually become a customer and what that looks like as well. And so RevOps really plays a role across that, again, entire customer journey from buyer to customer.
Agreed. And in many cases, that work, again, is already done. Also, within the sales team currently, or sometimes within the marketing team as well. Revenue operations can really be an overlay on sales and marketing to make sure that everyone's time is being spent as effectively as possible. Are the right leads being brought into the organization? Are enough of them being converted? Or is enough demand in there? Are they in the right industry to help us close deals today? Also, where we're going. So, are we skating to the puck? Are we calling into customers that are likely to be great customers of ours in 6 months? So we're continually having that funnel of new opportunities coming in through the organization, and revenue operations can help us give us a really good understanding of that within the organization. And if we're misaligned, if we're spending too much time talking to customers that are really the wrong customers for us, revenue operations, when it's humming along, can help identify that for us sooner than we might necessarily see it. And that can be a really valuable point as well.
Awesome. So we haven't had too many questions come in yet. I feel like maybe everyone's a little bit like, oh, interesting concept, much more like here to observe. But we did have I'd love to jump into a question that was submitted before the forum, and maybe would love to get some insights and perspectives. And I feel like this is a very good question, because again, it goes to the heart of what challenges folks are having today in their organizations when trying to socialize the concept and the idea of revenue ops. And very much, I feel the question was, do you guys have any tips on how to make it easy or easier to explain to leaders or those who are not as familiar with attribution revenue ops around how do you socialize the concept? How do you start the conversations? And we've seen this time and time again. There's passionate people. I'm sure most people in this conversation that have joined us today are those people who are curious, driven professionals. They see the problem as they're curious, and now, but the organization doesn't really, and they'd love, like, what tips do we have to offer around how do you start socializing these concepts? Understanding that everyone's busy, you're not basically going to be able to take someone through a presentation or through a big story. How do you actually maybe shortcut, or what are some of those tips? I feel like that the word tips is a good kind of maybe lead into this. Kyle, I'd love to I'd love to get your thoughts here around where do you start? What tips would you say? How do you socialize these concepts in the organization?
Help me today. Help me right now find the right audiences to go after today, and help me spend my time, excuse me, as effectively as possible. Show me who to speak to and why they're buying right now from our audience, or why they're buying from my competitor right now, and what I can do to turn them towards my attention. Think short term, think tactical, think actionable, be willing to find an advocate within sales who's willing to test a theory and test it out with them, but think shorter cycle, quick wins right now, and earn the right to take me on your longer term planning journey.
Yeah, I love that. So it's not necessarily even about socializing like the concept, getting this big buy-in. It's much more around, let's generate some results. Like that's what I'm hearing you say when you say think tactical, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then the result, and I feel like that's something Rosalyn mentioned earlier, results drive further investment and further interest. Rosalyn, let me not put words in your mouth. What would your tips be?
No, that's 100%, that low hanging fruit that we talked about, sort of solving some problems that are in real problems that are, that folks are having today, and solving those. And then you start to build credibility, you start to build momentum. But I look at it as really, it is like a sales cycle, right? It's thinking when you're selling to a customer, right? You want to understand what's the problem that I'm solving for them, right? What are those use cases? What are the things that are important to them? And like you mentioned earlier, it's like, what's in it for me, right? And try to isolate some of those problems. The best way to kind of get your foot in the door is to solve a problem, right? So a pain that somebody is having today. And from a RevOps perspective, there's probably a pretty good selection of pains that individuals are having within the organization. There's probably, you could probably think of a dozen right off the top of your head. Or even if it's not pain that they're having and they say, oh no, things are running really well, then you can dig into what can you do better, right? Because we can always do things better, faster, right? And more efficiently with less.
Right. And a good sales leader is going to help you help them. They're going to want to partner. And if that sales leader is disengaged and thinks that you're going to challenge them or in any way, shape, or form, it's a relationship issue. So find that advocate who truly is open to help and guiding you. That's critically important.
I love it. I feel like that's I'm just going to lean into what I feel like my takeaways from what both of you shared is about it's and I feel like this has been our experience as well. If you try to sell the big concept, it's oftentimes ends up being too big of a concept to grasp and to sell within the organization. It becomes very risky as well, because you need to buy in from everyone, and I need to have funding, and what tends to work much better is like Kyle said, think tactically and look at what's the next big campaign, maybe that's really important. How can we introduce some elements of kind of the core elements of revenue ops, which might make the campaign a bigger success? And it could literally be a little more cohesion between sales and marketing around, hey, this campaign is going to be running, what are the key themes, and maybe prepping a part of the sales team that maybe will get those leads around what's happening, what to expect, how to engage, and then being able to, and then literally looking at, was there better conversion? We often find if you can do this, which is again fairly small push within the existing framework, if we can show an improvement, it's going to be much easier now to start socializing the conversation. Hey, that campaign that we ran, remember the kind of jump we saw? We applied revenue ops concepts to it. Let's talk about how we can do this steadily across all campaigns moving forward.
Yeah, and Z, amplifying one thing that you touched on there, get those metrics. Understand the before and after, so you can measure and show what you actually accomplished. Not that it's about necessarily attribution per se. It's not about getting that personal credit. It's about showing the value in your partnership together. And so, hey, this worked, or this didn't work, and here's what we learned, and we'd like to try Y now instead of X. How do you feel about that? So that I can't emphasize that communication and that partnership enough, but get those metrics and understand together what good's going to look like.
Love it. And I feel like this is so, it's a perfect segue, as we usually like to wrap these up a little bit earlier. I know most of us are kind of running from call to call, meeting to meeting, so give folks a little bit of a break. So I would definitely want to say thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for attending, listening in. Kyle and Rosalyn, thank you so much for your perspectives. I feel like this is a really good dive into some of the thoughts, considerations, and even approaches for starting to think about revenue ops in the organization. I'll also mention, I feel like to kind of, it's a perfect lead in. I feel, Kyle, you couldn't have said it better. It's about the metrics. So join us next month, because we're going to tackle attribution. Attribution is about is about how do you actually get those metrics. So I couldn't have had a better cue in for our next conversation. So thank you, everyone. Rosalyn and Kyle, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. We're going to run a quick satisfaction poll. If you're still here, please provide. I would love to get your input. I feel like these conversations are continuing to evolve. So let us know, was this helpful? Was it not helpful? How can we improve it moving forward? Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.